But yeah, good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Welcome to the stream. So I introduced you as Burkhart, but you have the alias like Firehammer Games as well. How do you prefer to be referred to?
You can just call me Ken. I mean, Kenneth's my name, Ken's a nickname. That's perfectly fine.
All right, sounds good. We've got your entry ET 2021 up on stream here, um, which I got through, I think, in a pretty decent time, all things considered, especially having watched Evensky's attempt.
Yep. Alice also said she was able to do it. I think it boils down to just taking your time instead of rushing through it, which, just happens to be the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will get started with the questions here. I'll try to play in the background, but I don't know how well I'll do with trying to split my focus here. But yeah, so with that said, how did you decide on what you were going to make for the jam?
Well, the couple of weeks before the jam, clues were released by our Grand Raccoon host, Evansky, and I think one letter too many got out, and we kind of all knew what it was. No, no, no. It wasn't a letter, it was a specific clue saying someone had white in their avatar that had the right guess.
Hmm.
And so basically, we all knew it was going to be a big mistake, but I had no idea what I was going to do. And the theme is kind of vague, which is okay, not my favorite kind of thing, but I couldn't figure out what to make. So I guess I got to thinking about video games and mistakes in the same context, and ET is what came to mind.
Yeah, it's a very famous example of like, holy cow, pretty
Video
much,
game and mistake.
yeah, very, very often mentioned as like responsible for the video game crash, like the just complete industry collapse in was it 1980s?
It was definitely 1980s, and I would not say that this thing was the blame, but Atari certainly made their mistake with it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing. Like I know that it's an exaggeration to say that it was this one game's fault. It came out. It was a very public disappointment at the time that it was released. So that's how it got the bad rap for it. But yeah, I guess. So, what inspired you to like recreate the character in 3D?
Well, I have never gotten good at drawing pixel art or any other type of 2D art, but in 3D it feels like there's a lot more freedom, and at least in my case, I know my way around 3D software much more than I do. I mean, I might know 2D software, but as far as the actual trying to get something at the least of a acceptable level, it's not happening with pixel art.
Mm.
At least with 3D, you can kind of read what I was trying to do if I put any effort into it.
Yeah, yeah, I'd say so.
And I'm not great at it, but I know I can do better if I spend the time on it. But there's so many things you can do to cheat in 3D as well, just to get some kind of result. You can't really cheat in 2D the same way.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like there are different cheats that you can do in 2D than 3D, but I would say that yeah, the for what you were trying to go for, like it's always about using the tools that you're most familiar with. So yeah, that's cool. Um, I guess, and this is actually something I don't have direct experience with from Game Maker Studio 2. Is this character model, is this being rendered natively?
Nope, it's all pre-rendered.
Okay.
Nope, I am not Bart and Zor and those guys that are actually doing 3D. Mine is all just pre-rendered stuff in Blender.
Okay, yeah, because it was a little hard to tell because you got a very high frame count and there's not really like it's also seems to be at a pretty high resolution because I don't see many jagged edges on the model, so I was genuinely not sure whether you were actually getting 3D models to work in the engine or whether that was
Yep, the
pre-rendered.
character is 256 by 256. It doesn't necessarily fill up literally the whole frame, but that's what you would call tile size of the character.
Right.
The map itself is one big 4096 by 4096 picture. I basically made a terrain and put some grass on it and colored it and just rendered one big picture at a slight angle. The
Nice.
only thing I think I did 2D were the holes that you see. And
Right.
that literally, I think everything else was 3D. Even the candies I did in 3D.
So the can and then what about the power spots?
I actually did those in 3D.
Oh wow.
I got some icons off of the Noun project, and then I used that to kind of make a displacement on. It wasn't exactly a circle; it was a sphere that I flattened, and then you can see how it, like the fork and knife, is displacing that
Mm-hmm.
flat circle thing, and that's what made the power stations.
And then this title text here, this is, I assume this image that I'm looking at here is made in Photoshop?
The title text, yes. Um, the background, if you've heard of, it's kind of an old program called Universe, but it's basically for just making space scenes. I just put that together real quick in there, and then the four other things are came from renders,
Right. Yeah, with the
and
outline effect applied, the outer glow.
those in Photoshop exactly.
All right. So what was your, yeah, we got a little bit into the development process talking about how you made the stuff in the 3D models, but like, I don't know, in terms of an ordering of like, did you start in the 3D model and the game concurrently, or did you like make all the models and then work on the game? Like, how exactly does your development process go?
It was all mixed up. So I started the game itself, kind of got, I used my audio system and input system, so I got those imported and, just went ahead and made a couple controller objects, made some rooms, made a few folders to try to organize stuff. But then before I would make the character, I would go ahead and actually make the model for it instead of putting a placeholder. So it was all mixed in. When I went to making the holes, I went ahead and drew the whole graphic first.
Yeah, okay. So it wasn't like do everything in one program, shift over to another program. It was just like a very as it comes up, you essentially had a working template for the game that was the original title. So you were just sort of working from that.
That's the general gist of it. But the reason I also did it that way, as far as doing one thing at a time, but doing the whole thing, instead of trying to do everything all at once graphically, all at once programming, is that way anything I have to leave out, at least everything else is theoretically feature complete.
Yep. Yep. No, I think that's a great way to do it. I know that there's plenty of people who will like, okay, game jam, I'm gonna start with my art, and then it's like, oh well, I have all this art and I couldn't finish the game. Oops.
And I've never been good at game jams. This is only the third one I've done. The first one I did was years ago. I did a Ludum Dare. I actually used Unity for that one, but then I did this one and I did the GMC jam just before it with the ugly clowns. Also, Evanski's favorite game of that, whether he admits it or not. Yes.
Oh man, I heard the end of Evensky's rant on playing this game, and he got real mad, and I was a little sad because it's like, you know what? I had like a hard time playing this game to be sure, but I also had a decent amount of fun playing it. I felt really triumphant when I was able to successfully manage the systems and succeed without ever losing my progress. Like just because the threat of losing progress is so real, the fact like if you're able to successfully get through it without losing that progress, you just yeah you feel really accomplished. So that was like one of the main reasons I wanted to have a discussion about this because I thought like it's obviously really rough around the edges and obviously the inspiration behind the game, ET being what it is. Um, but there's a lot, like, I can imagine a fully realized game based on a similar set of mechanics that would just work, like, pretty darn well.
I'm not sure if it would or not. Stress management is almost a genre I made here, and mostly on accident. But then, as it got more difficult, as I did level one, it was easy. Level two, and then level three even more so. It ended up turning into stress management more than top down shooter, if you get what I'm saying.
Right.
And it wasn't intentional, but I guess that's just kinda how it worked out.
Yeah, and
It's
that's
almost a resource management combined with stress management in a sense.
yeah, I would absolutely say that it is that, and like I think acknowledging that that's what it is, and like maybe leaning into it. Um, hang on, Evensky's dropped some kind of GIF. Am I going to regret opening this? Um, oh, okay.
I just
It's
did myself, so
all
there you
right.
go.
Yeah. Whoop. Turn around. All right. Um, well, yeah. I mean, so I guess from that perspective, when you set out to clone the game, essentially, did you have it in mind that it was going to be more of like a action focused game, and then it just sort of
Uh,
became what it is?
kind of. I mean, even the original wasn't necessarily action, I guess. I mean, yes and no,
Mm-hmm.
but by the time I was done and worked on it, tried to balance the baddies and whatnot, that's just kind of the way it ended up, and I didn't have time to really tweak it and make it harder or easier at that point.
Right. I mean, yeah, I maintain that an art project can sort of like evolve over time. Like whatever your original goal was as the artist, um, oops, I pressed the wrong button there. You know, you at some point you can really just like lean into what does the project want to be, and what the project wants to be might not necessarily be what you had in mind at first, but there's nothing wrong with that. And um, I guess that you were saying like you didn't necessarily have time to change what the project became, um, in the process, in the time constraint you had within the jam, but I would say you don't necessarily have to change it as much as you can lean into what it became.
Well, I didn't have time to really lean into it either. That's the
Okay,
thing. I
well,
will. There were, as you know, in all jam games, there's always something somebody wants to add on and do that they missed. Like, look at that lovely energy bar. There's just so much. The phone icon things were just a really quick thing because I needed to kind of hurry up and get the thing done. And I didn't. The biggest thing was, some kind of in-game tutorial. The sound effects are horrid. I had a pack I had bought off the Unity store, and I'm like, well, ET is kind of a monster. Let's make him make, as somebody mentioned, horny, horny monkey sounds or whatever they had said. Ape. There you go. Horny ape sounds.
yeah, I mean, it does sound something like a Sasquatch, but I think it definitely adds to the what do you want to say, like the game.
Well, it certainly adds to the feel of a jam game, if nothing
Absolutely.
else. I guess the one thing I did do successfully with it was I did not want you to be in an impossible situation unless it was your own fault.
Hmm.
So like if you have energy, and you get caught by the scientist, it's not game over as long as you have energy and then you
Hmm.
have enough candy to go recharge real quick.
Yeah.
So at least that part worked out.
Yeah.
There you go. Evan's got it right. Horny gorilla, that's the word that was used. Not ape. I knew it was something like that.
Some kind of curse sound to be sure. All right. So we talked about the process a bit. We talked about, um, you know, what the project sort of became in spite of what you might have originally intended. Um, I'm going to throw myself on the eat spot here, and then yeah, there we go. Um, okay, so the next question I had was, did you need to cut or change anything in order to get the game finished on time?
Well, cutting, I think we kind of mentioned a couple of things. There was just a lot of things that I rushed just to kind of at least finish it to where you could complete the game.
Mm-hmm.
The ending was most certainly rushed for the different endings.
Right.
I don't know what happened. There's some kind of a bug where the good ending doesn't play the music. Um, there were a lot of features, ease of play features, like someone mentioned, maybe I think it was Alice, maybe like the range of your yell. I should have like sound circles or something so you can really see how far it goes.
Yeah.
And indicators so that when they're scared or when they're actually chasing you. The some kind of in-game tutorials, that kind of thing. There was certainly a lot of things that were cut and or missed.
Yeah, and like that's all right. I guess you don't really have any plans to go back and further develop the game. Um, but I mean, like outside of the context of this being like the ET character, um, do you think that like you could ever take these elements and what the game sort of became and make anything out of that?
I actually do. I don't know if it's the kind of game I would want to make.
Right.
I generally like more action type stuff or RPG type stuff. Stress and resource management, maybe RTS type resource management, but this kind, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if I'd be able to actually put myself into developing it just because it's not necessarily my type of game. Like I wouldn't be very good at making a puzzle game just because it's not my thing.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. Like if it's not something that plays to the kind of game that you want to make, then like who I definitely don't believe in making a game unless you are like it is something that you personally enjoy. Because like if you make a game that at least you enjoy, then at least one person is gonna have fun with that game. But if you make a game that even you don't enjoy, then how on earth do you know that anyone is going to enjoy it?
And that's kind of the catch, although that's a lot of the reason why jams exist.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can throw something out there, you only spent 3 days on it, and if people don't like it, okay, the worst thing that happened was I wasted 3 days and got a bad score.
Yeah.
Unlike, AAA companies that really have to focus on prototyping things, that's basically what we're doing with game jams, and
Yep.
that's a good thing.
Yep.
We get to prove concepts or disprove them, as the case may be. We can see if a concept works, but what changes are needed, that kind of thing. Like, I
Yeah.
think this concept would work if somebody likes this type of game, but they would have to, do it much better than I did, of course. And then they would have to like it so that they can really put good energy into it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So on the one hand, I don't know. I ended up sort of like weirdly fond of this game. So I'm sad to hear that you won't necessarily be taking up the mantle of continuing it, but for a completely understandable reason. Um, I wouldn't want you to force yourself to be playing a game or making a game rather that you yourself don't enjoy.
And there might come a day where I actually do feel like making something like this because it there is a certain interest. So it's always that slight possibility. But it'll be on my list of concepts, I guess you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there we go. I managed to complete the game. Third level of
That's what
difficulty,
I
get
was
the special
about to
ending.
say. You not only completed it, but you did it while doing, this interview. So there you go. Kudos.
Thank you.
See, it is possible.
It's totally possible. And yeah, that's
There's the salt.
uh, yeah, a literal salt emoji from Ivinsky there.
Yep.
Um, I think it goes back to what I said even on another stream, which was that like you can lean into your frustration and you can let it get the better of you. But it's also just because I was so aware of the possibility of the loss of progress, I just played super, super cautiously. Like, I basically had a reset on that last level there where I got one piece, lost it, ate almost all my candy, and I could have just restarted for that like first chunk of time that I'd invested in the level was basically lost. But from there on out, I just built myself up to around 20 candies, which for some reason seems like the magical number to me. And then just kept playing cautiously, alternating between the positions. There's a reason I didn't jump back in today at level 3. I specifically wanted to replay levels 1 and 2 to remind myself of where everything on the map was. Um, so, I guess even if it didn't necessarily come out as you expected, I think that, both from the perspective of how much time it would have taken to make unique maps for each level, and just from the perspective of um, you need you have to build up your memory of where all the spots are from the earlier levels in order to be able to take on the later levels. So yeah, that really worked out.
Oh, and that was actually part of what my intention was. Is I wanted to kind of clone the original, but I wanted to do things better. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in the original, you couldn't even see the power stations or whatever
Yeah,
you want to
that's
call them in the original. You would just get this little icon at the top of your screen, and have no idea there were these little warp things. So you could, you get a right arrow and it would warp you to the next screen on the right, but
mm-hmm.
then you might be in the middle of a hole and you would just fall in.
Yeah,
The baddies could, because it wasn't a scrolling thing, the baddies would just appear at the screen edge
yeah.
while they're chasing. I tried to make things better, and I'd say I did do that
Mm-hmm.
while kind of keeping the general gist of the original. So I feel good about that at least. Now,
Yeah,
whether it was all good quality or whatnot's another story, but I did what I set out to do, if nothing else.
yeah, absolutely. And I do think it is a very complete gem entry from that perspective. I mean, you've got the 3 levels of difficulty. You've even got like a full-on. This is your Firehammer like input system, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the full ability to remap the keys, which I think the default keys of WSD space shift, like that's usually what I default to as well. Um, I do
I
know that.
definitely tried there, and the audio system thing works too, as far as the volume controls.
Yep.
And I didn't have it where it'll save the inputs, but the volumes will actually save if you run it again.
Hmm.
But that's because the system does it automatically unless you tell it not to. That's the
Right.
only reason.
Yeah, I know that I've had some issues in using the older version of GameMaker where I'll try to write to an INI file and like sometimes it'll fail, and then especially in HTML5 where a game will never crash because of something like that, but it will skip code. Like that has caused some really hard to diagnose bugs when I'm trying to publish out an HTML5 build.
I did play with HTML5. I actually have the HTML5 module for GMS2, although I haven't really used it except for to test a couple things, and it's definitely quirky
Hmm.
to to say things nicely. They
Yeah.
haven't really. I mean, I guess in general they've done well with it because it is usable, but
Hmm.
it's definitely got its quirks.
Yeah, for sure. Um, it would be nice if it was just like ran exactly as you expect it to, but I don't know. Maybe someday it will. I don't know. I've been sort of transitioning over to Unity as well, so I'm not even using GameMaker Studio 2. Um, so I don't know. I think it would be great for people who use it, but personally, I think Unity's web player does a much better job of maintaining feature parity with the desktop builds. Not that I have the most experience with that either. I get that general impression.
That is something that it seems like I've seen as well, that the WebGL builds that come from Unity do seem to be much closer to desktop.
Yeah. Um, all right. Well, I'm gonna throw it out to chat if anyone has any questions they would like for me to ask Ken. Otherwise, just in the meantime, while we're waiting for people to potentially type out any questions, is there anything else? Any other just like fun, quirky details? Well, immediately we have Evensky asking why ET, but if you were here at the start of the stream, you would have heard the answer to that question already. So unless there's
Late.
unless there's any other particular reason why, like, I don't know, are you a fan of the movie E.T. at all, or is there any other reason?
Not in particular, but the thing is with the jam is when you're like me, you don't have any ideas. So when you suddenly get an idea and it's really close to the beginning or even slightly before, you're better off running with it than trying to wait for the next idea and you start late.
Yep, yep, I can definitely see that. I
And
actually
it
didn't.
certainly fits the theme. That's the
It
main
certainly
reason it was
does.
good.
Yeah, I didn't actually. I didn't know about the early hint. I knew like I sort of guessed about a day before that it was going to be a big mistake. I wasn't up on reading all the forums, so um, the idea that I ended up going with was sort of similarly based on like I think it's going to be this, so I'm gonna go with this idea. But then I also just sort of had like a last minute shift and then ended up making another platforming game because I like that platforming engine. I like doing level design, and I didn't want to make another narrative game like I have done for a couple other jams. Um, but I guess I don't know if we're not getting any other questions from the chat. Then if there's any like final bit of trivia or anything that you just no one would know unless you mentioned it that you want to share, uh, yeah, now's the time.
Uh, well, I can't really think of much except for I don't know. I guess part of the reason I've always done 3D is because my even though my first experience I think was Q Basic, and that's obviously not a 3D engine. That's a extremely old mid 90s programming thing. Back with Windows 3.1, you could log out into DOS and use it. Um, but then it didn't take long to where I was trying to code a 3D engine using C++ and just OpenGL directly. And I never followed trying to get a 2D engine from that. I always went straight to 3D for whatever reason. So that's part of why I guess I've just never gotten into the 2D side, even if the gameplay is 2D. So there
Yeah,
you go.
cool. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing I love to hear. Um, Oh, and then I guess one question I sort of missed here was: are there any particularly clever hacks or shortcuts that you used on this game jam that you wouldn't have used in the context of a proper production project?
Well, I will say one, the two baddies came from Mixamo. I would not generally use those characters, but I needed baddies and I needed them now.
Mm-hmm.
So you got Mixamo baddies with nothing else but a running animation, but that's all they have to do. So oh well. Um, and then just import the FBX to blenders, render them out. Okay, we're good. Um, the other thing I did that I would never do, my audio system stores the sound for you. Like if you play a music track, it'll store it. So
Mm-hmm.
whenever you go to the next room or whatever, you don't have to worry about stopping the other music. You just play a new one and it already knows what you did. You can
Mm-hmm.
make your own global functions to handle it too. Same idea.
Yeah.
Um, but what I did was I had a main controller object. I did the whole thing of making an intro room, making that persistent object, and you never go back to that room. And so the object never duplicates and you're all good.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did is I had that object just have a room start event, and then depending on which room it was, I just said, okay, play this music.
Yeah.
And I would not do that in an actual production because I would prefer the actual whatever's controlling the levels you're going to and whatnot be how it's done. But It was quick and easy, and since I had the audio system, there it is.
Yeah, I mean the thing that you've described is almost exactly the music controller that I ended up writing for my own game here. It's a persistent object. It starts playing music. It is a bit different because this project is actually like three projects nested in one. So based on which project it is, that's where it will choose. Like again, I've got just a room switch case for the different tracks, and then this just simply fades out one track after the course of a second, and then starts the next track, which was, you know, back here in Game Maker Studio 1.4, it's very easy to do. I don't know what it looks like in Game Maker Studio 2.
And it's really basically the same thing. The only thing is that with my audio system, I wanted to have music that kind of handled this stuff. It does do a couple other things besides just fading. Like it'll
Mm-hmm.
remember where you were in the music.
Uh-huh.
Like I don't know if you noticed in ET, but whenever you start a level, if you play the same level, it'll start in the middle of the track because that's where it was when you left.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent feature. Then you're not just constantly hearing the beginning of the track every single time you play.
And then there's another thing it does that I didn't do in ET, but if you've played, like, you remember the original Super Nintendo Super Mario World, when you ride a Yoshi, you get a slightly different music track.
Yeah, it's
It
it's
adds on these
layering.
little notes to it. It's a
Yeah,
flavor.
yeah.
Um, and my system will well, not automatically, but if you can play a track and then you tell it to kind of swap fade to this other version of it, and it'll automatically do that and fade them through. All you have to do is tell it to do it.
Right. So you have two completely different music tracks, and you are fading to the second track, maintaining your position that it was in for the first track.
That's the gist of it. It's not
Okay.
that complicated when you actually think about it,
Yeah.
but it's just the implementation that's already done. And
Yep.
then it's got a bunch of stuff for the sound effects. You probably noticed that the sound effects were, even if they were repetitive, they're never exactly the same.
Yeah.
Even on those buttons and clicks, it's slightly varied.
Yep. I've seen some people go a little overboard with that, and they have like wildly different sounds instead of just like pitch shift or like subtle variations on the sound effect, and it's a little maddening. But this is good.
At least it's just a number that you can send to the function when you call it. You can
Yeah.
say point two instead of point one or whatever.
Yep.
It's easy enough to change. I wanted to make an actual GUI where you can make these sounds, but GameMaker doesn't make that easy.
Mm. Yeah. I know that I've done some stuff with GameMaker that's like a tool that then like outputs something, but it never ended up becoming well. Okay, I sort of made something that ended up seeing the light of day that was like GUI based in that sense. Um, this like level editing tool, um, very large buttons that you could then like click and place and save and load, and yeah, it was tough to get working in a way that felt clean, and if it were up to me, I wouldn't be designing an interface like this nowadays. This was a long time ago, but it was
The
functional.
part that is hard for me isn't necessarily programming the GUI itself.
Yeah.
Not that that's easy because you're having to do it the hard way instead of through a GUI,
Hmm.
but it's the fact that I need to know for like for my input system, I made one, and what it does is you have a macro that is for your project directory,
Hmm.
and so you have to turn the sandbox off, and you run the game, but put my room first,
Hmm.
and then it'll go to the configuration where you can set up the defaults.
Right.
Um, for the sound system, I wanted to do something similar, and you would do the same thing, and then it would make. I think I wanted to do it where it would directly change a code file. And I did look and see you can access the GML code, but I also have to be able to say, okay, you have this many sound resources, and this is what they're named. And so it's either hack it together by looping from 1 to a million resource ID, or hack the project file. And neither one of those was nice.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I guess I don't know. So do you have are you thinking about making are you still facing that dilemma of like it's either this or this and neither of them are that nice, or have you thought of something since that might be like a better compromise?
Well, my first compromise, just to go ahead and get the thing released, is you just define the sounds in code right now.
Right.
That's the easy way. After the first release, when I cut back to it, I did do testing as far as looping through. I don't remember how high I went, but
Hmm.
and at least on testing, even though it is undefined and you're not supposed to do things based off of undocumented things,
Hmm.
but I think if you loop from 0 to, like, I think it was maybe 49,000 or something, where it was nice and fast enough. And so you would just, for each single number, is this a sound effect? And give me the name if it is.
Mm.
There's functions in GMS2 for more directly accessing your assets. So I can do it. And that would probably be how I have to do it instead of trying to hack their project files.
Yeah,
And then
I
the
see.
GML code is pretty easily accessible because no matter what folder you put it in, it's always going to be in the same folder in the project structure. And then they just have some what's it called? They just have some things that say what folder it's in, but in your project files, it's in the same place
Right.
regardless.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, that definitely sounds like it'll be a very useful tool. Obviously, like you use all your own tools for your own projects. So, is that like, do you are you developing tools that you're primarily using for yourself, and then you also make them accessible to others, or are you deliberately creating tools that you are putting out there for others to use, and then you may end up using them in your own projects?
No, typically when I make something, the idea comes from a need that I have.
Yeah.
And it's, especially the input system. That's always been my pet peeve. If you can't configure your controls in a game, it's just bad.
Yeah.
I mean, back in the 80s and maybe early 90s, okay, fine. But anytime after that, if you can't do your own, that's just wrong.
Mm.
The biggest culprit of that I think I played was Earth Siege 2. You could not do your own controls, and it was just horrid.
Mm. Yeah, I actually my platforming games again, if I actually worked and it wasn't so heavily like sandboxed because this is an old program and Windows doesn't like it when I compile stuff with this. Um, but even if I don't have an actual interface for it, I am loading from an INI file. So in theory, you are able to configure the controls in the game. Unfortunately, there's no GUI for it, but I know that I wouldn't say that that counts. I would say that you actually need a GUI to have a properly configurable control experience. Otherwise, like editing an INI file, like at best you're getting someone else's control set that you're copy pasting in to replace your own INI file, and no matter how you slice it, it's not a great experience. But the
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 way I
core
like for
functionality.
controls is that I tell you, hit the button you want to use to jump, and
Yeah.
then you hit the button.
Yep.
And even if I don't have the name right, because you're using some really old gamepad that nobody knows what button is actually what,
Hmm.
but at least you hit the button so you know what it is yourself.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
And
All
I
right.
do have a bunch of descriptions in there, but for older gamepads, they don't work out.
Right.
They just say button one or button two or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, and that's it's fine. As you said, if people are configuring their own controls, then they know. Um,
That's the idea.
all right. Well, I think we're gonna wrap things up there. But thank you so much for joining me on the call and talking through this project. I do think it was a lot of fun to play, and I look forward to seeing future Jam projects.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for the questions, and thank you for the time.
Absolutely. All right. Well, have a good evening then, and hopefully we'll get to talk again soon.
Yes, sir. Take care. See you
Take
around.
care.
Bye.